Okay, I'm gonna call this joint meeting of the Planning Board and MBTA Task Force to order. The Planning Board, I'll take a roll call. Laura Tenney. Here. Chris Olney.
Here.
Mary Foley.
Here.
Sue Philbrick. Here. Sarah Creighton. I'm Sarah Hammond Creighton, and I'm the Vice Chair of the Planning Board. And before we start, I just want to, it's our first meeting, since the passing of our chair, Ron Mastrogiacomo. And I just want to acknowledge that, he served on the planning board for 14 years.
Wow.
And chair as 5. And he was an engineer. So by my calculations, he spent more than 1,200 hours in this room, doing the business of the town, and that he cared very deeply about. So we miss his gentle spirit, his good manners, his extraordinary preparation, and his commitment to the best interests of Manchester. And if Chris wanted to also say something.
Sure. So as a member of the planning board, I have to recognize Ron for his many contributions to what the board was doing. For those of you who may have attended those meetings, he felt very strongly about the MBTA law and wanted to make sure that the town complied with it. Of course, being an engineer, he wanted it to be neat and tidy and on the schedule. Unfortunately, we can't do a neat and tidy or a schedule, but we can honor him by fulfilling his desire that we reach the best solution we can for the town.
Thank you. And I was gonna say, now you need to tell us.
So on that note, now that Gar is here, I can call the task force to order. So I'll start with a roll call. Chris Olney on the chair. Sarah, yeah. And Denny Hall, and then Sue Philbrick, Andy Bob Turner, and Gar Morris.
And Mike.
And Mike Pratt. And Ann Harrison is not here yet, but maybe she'll arrive shortly. Okay.
Great. This is gonna be a joint meeting tonight, but before we start, I have 3 quick planning board announcements. The first is that Ron's position will be filled by an appointment by the select board and the planning board, which is how vacancies are filled, and it will be for the year. The deadline for applications will be in the crickets shortly.
Okay.
And people who are interested should follow the instructions in the cricket or and on the website, which I assume is a letter to the select board.
Testing.
The
Testing.
second,
Oh, Richard is there.
great.
Yes,
Richard, welcome.
Okay. The second
glad to be here.
The second announcement for the planning board is that the task force meetings, we will be joint with task force going forward. So that seems to be more efficient, we hope, as long as we can sign in. And then the third announcement that some of you may be wondering about is that the cell signaling technologies special permit is being postponed with their agreement, their cooperation to begin May 28th, when we have a full board. So that Mark has received correspondence from them that they are willing to postpone that. Any other?
We will renotice it as a new public hearing so that the 2 newly appointed / elected officials may participate in the entire proceedings, and all 7 members, at least initially, will be eligible to vote.
Great. Thank you. Okay, now I'll turn it over to Chris to.
Okay, you want to start
Could
the,
I just interrupt for a moment? You didn't ask if anybody else wanted to say anything about Ron, so
Oh,
I
sorry.
also wanted to say, I worked with him for all 7 years that I've been on the board, and he was wonderful to work with, very kind man, and a good sense of humor, and he will be very missed. I also wanted to acknowledge that a very good friend, a planning board member, is Christine Delicio is diagnosed with a brain tumor, and she will be going through surgery and treatment. And so as a planning board member, I want to acknowledge that and hope that the town and everybody prays for her.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you.
Certainly, we wish Christine the best. Any other comments on? Okay. thank you.
Okay, shall we start the slideshow? So we're going to move into the public forum a little bit early and talk about two different aspects of the MBTA zoning law. The first is a discussion of the MBTA zoning districts, which will be overlay districts. And when we're done with that, we're going to talk about design guidelines, and we have a group of architects here who have been working very hard to come up with some draft guidelines that the town can use in reviewing any development projects that come along under the terms of the MBTA zoning. And so the way we're going to start off with the districts, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how we came up with the guiding principles and how we selected these districts. And then Mark Resnick, the town planner, is going to describe each of them. And after each description, I'm going to open it up for questions and comments from the public and from the board, of course, from both committees. Get this all straight here. So we'll go through each district and have questions and answers after each one. And then we'll go to the design guidelines. And after that, we'll again have questions and comments. So the MBTA task force, in trying to figure out how to do this, decided right away that we wanted to follow certain principles and how we were going to select districts. The first, most important to us, was minimizing potential changes to the town's historic character and to the current zoning in place. The second is to preserve the town's businesses and restaurants. The third was to maintain the small scale and a variety of architectural style that makes up the town's character. And the fourth was to reduce the number of new incremental residential units that could be allowed. This one is a tricky, this last point is a tricky one. A lot of people ask how many existing residential units will count towards the new requirement. And the answer is, well, none of them count because none of them are allowed currently by zoning exactly the way the MBTA zoning law works anyway. But they do count in a funny way, which is whatever new units get built, they're either going to include what's already there as residential units or replace them. So the incremental number of new units may be much smaller than if it were just a open piece of land and we could just build the units by right. So if we fumble around with trying to answer this question, that's why. It's a tricky thing that the existing units are important to the town and they will remain. What we're really interested in is reducing the number of incremental new ones that would get built. And one final point about this is that these things don't all necessarily correlate perfectly together. So there's some balancing when we try to reduce the number of units or minimize potential changes. That may mean doing something that doesn't comply with both of them. And we have to judge which is most important. So let's get to the next slide. So our goals are first to give you an update, second to provide you the background on how we did this. Third, get input and direction from about each of these districts. And then hear about the design guidelines. The future meetings will actually provide some actual zoning language and actual zoning limitations that we're talking about, and then have an opportunity for further revisions as we go along. We are planning a big community forum on the 27th of April, hopefully at the high school, where there'll be a sort of hands-on thing where people can come, talk to us individually, look at the maps on tables, and provide more input as well.
As an aside, superintendent said that he's interested in that. They're set up to do that.
Okay, well, we'll consider that as well. Thank you, Sarah. So we may try that at the Memorial School as well. So the state has given us some rules on how we can do this, and it's very important that we all understand what these rules are.
And we can-
The first thing is that we have to provide, can you go back for a second?
Oh, sorry.
We have to provide a district or districts that total 37 acres. The second is that the minimum acres for one single contiguous zoning district is 18.5 acres. We can have more than one district, and in fact, we're proposing 4. The total acres that need to be within a half mile of the train station are 14 acres. So 14 acres out of the downtown area have to be included in this district. The minimum size of a district is 5 acres. The total housing capacity of all required districts is 559, which theoretically would be derived by taking 37 and multiplying that times 15. That's 555. We're not quite sure why the state says 559. We guess it's because it's actually 37.12 acres or something, and it's a rounding error, but we're gonna get to the bottom of that. So the average required minimum density of housing units is 15 units per acre, but every district doesn't have to be 15. Some can be more dense and others less dense, as long as the average over all the districts is 15. So we're talking about not creating new zoning districts. We want to create a series of overlay districts. Overlay districts are superimposed on existing current zoning, and so they don't replace it, they simply are on top of it. They allow certain uses as long as specific conditions or limitations are followed. As a result, property owners can create multifamily residential uses in accordance with the specific rules and limitations. Property owners are not obligated to do anything. They can just keep the property just the way it is, or do whatever is allowed under their current zoning and not worry about this multifamily housing at all. The town is allowed to create design guidelines, and we'll discuss that a little bit later. And the underlying district and its regulations will remain unchanged, so there are still going to be height and setback and parking requirements. So here are the districts in one big map, just to show you roughly where they are. 3 of them are more or less in the downtown. We're showing one of the districts has got 4 sub-districts, and they're called out here also. We'll get into that shortly as well. Then there's one that we're proposing in the LCD, and that would be outside the 1/2 mile radius. The others are all within a 1/2 mile of the downtown. So let's get into each one. We'll start off with Newport Park, Pine Street, Morse Court, Sawmill Circle, Elm Street, and Powder House Lane. Mark, take it away.
So this district starts at the kind of the north end of Pine Street, where Newport Park development is, which has a fair number of units, runs down Pine Street, down to the corner of where the gas station is, and then runs behind the commercial properties over toward Powder House, apartments and includes all of that property. If you,
Those aren't commercial property, those are historic district properties.
at that as well.
Okay.
If you,
There's nothing commercial.
okay, but, well, if you turn to the next slide, you turn to the next slide, you will see how we arrived at this district. So at the very top, we targeted the Newport park development. It's already has a large number of units, and there's been discussion about adding some more housing there and rehabbing that facility. As you go down to the other red at the end of Pine Street, there, that's where the gas station is. That was thought of as being perhaps someday redeveloped. And then along Pine Street, there's another set of condos, and those condos are already existing. There's a fair, I don't know the total number of units. I think it's like 12, 11. And so we didn't expect those to get redeveloped. So that's a good parcel to include in an overlay district, as are the new two-family units. I don't know what the name of that. Sawmill Circle, and then the Powder House apartments. So we targeted those as areas zoned for high density. So in order to connect those, we included the other blue areas. That way we meet the requirement of getting at least the 18 point something acres that's required to be a contiguous district. So this area of town has the largest number of areas that we wanted to target. The other thing is to note is Sarah had mentioned the local historic district. Local historic district is in green at the bottom. None of the local historic district properties are within the this zone that we've created, nor are they in any of the other zones. So we purposely stayed away from those properties. And I think that's
Okay.
everything.
So comments from the board? Questions, comments?
The only thing is, we said earlier, there were no commercial properties, but there are on Elm Street.
There are some on Elm Street.
And the gas station.
And the gas station.
I just have a question.
Yes.
Can you explain, so the Newport Park is housing authority.
That's correct.
So deed restricted for age. How could
Yes.
multifamily housing go on that?
Well, it is multifamily housing. Certainly age-restricted housing is allowed in a district. It can't be required. We're not requiring it, and in fact, the renovation plan that the Affordable Housing Trust is looking at presumes that parts of it would not be age-restricted anymore.
Okay, so they would, if they did that, that would go under the current zoning, not the overlay.
It would go under the overlay, of course, because we don't allow multifamily housing in any district.
And
in
then
any
would the
place.
tax structure change on that land?
Tax structure, no.
I don't think we get
Well,
taxes.
it would depend. We do not currently get taxes. It would depend on how that property were redeveloped. If a private developer came in, put up some market rate units as part of that project, then there would be some taxable income.
Okay,
The idea is to work with the MHA in order to come up with a viable development if it's redeveloped.
yeah, and I understand that, and I think that's a good idea. I just don't know how. I just don't quite get it yet, but I'll keep looking.
So the zoning cannot require something to be age restricted or other types of restrictions on the housing. Has to be unrestricted. But if something already exists in the district, or a developer wants to propose that a development he's gonna build is age restricted or senior housing, he can do that. Cause he's still building multifamily units. But, and that's just a form of ownership, but we as a community cannot make that a requirement of the district, so. I think that's what's confusing some people. The task force at first, when I got here, was still going back and forth and trying to get an opinion from our consultant on that. So that's been the determination, that as long as we don't require it, it's okay if it exists or someone comes in and builds it later.
The state is blind to the existing.
No, I understand
that-
all that. I just know with
Mhm.
deed restriction and who owns the land, it gets a little tricky because it's
Mhm.
the way the housing authorities are adopted throughout the state.
State
but-
doesn't care.
So, in fact, the state tells us what land is excluded and can't be zoned, and Newport Park is not excluded, so we can certainly zone it. Any questions? Oh, yes, Laura.
Just a couple of clarifying questions. I think I broadly understand why the task force got here. It seems like there's a logical reason for your doing what you're doing. My two questions are, there's a sort of a tail on the apartments toward past the fire station area,
Right
and
there.
is that all one parcel, that kind of shape?
Yes, oh, in fact, Laura, that's an interesting question, because one of the tricky things about this project is the way the state looks at it is parcel by parcel. We
Right.
can't zone half a parcel.
Yeah,
We
okay.
can't say 5 acres in the LCD is gonna be rezoned. We can't do that. It's gotta be a parcel of land.
It has nothing to do with frontage or anything like that. It's
No.
just parcel boundaries.
Yes.
Okay, so that's part of the same parcel. Thank you. And then the red and blue, I know you're gonna be talking about different sub-districts. Are these indicating different sub-districts, or is this more like the target is we picked these parcels because they made sense, and the blue sort of stitches it all together?
That's correct. Yeah.
It's the latter.
It's the latter. Yeah.
So the subdivisions would be Newport Park would be one subdistrict. Powder House Apartments would be another subdistrict. Along Pine Street would be a third subdistrict, and then Morse Court and Sawmill Circle would be the final subdistrict.
Okay, and you're talking about that later. in the
Well,
presentation.
a little bit later.
Okay, that's fine. Can I ask a follow-up question?
Yes,
In those sub-districts, is it strategic to have different densities in different portions? Or does the district have to have a uniform set of zoning requirements for the overlay?
so the former, we definitely want to vary the densities in these different subdistricts. We don't want to see a whole lot of new units necessarily built along Pine Street, for example. So that might be a lower density, but we'd like higher density at Newport Park and at Powder House Lane, because those are affordable properties, and that would help us to get more affordable units built, so.
So we may be able to keep the density a little lower along Pine Street because we have the density a little higher at those two existing developments. And then that would kind of target where units might be developed.
And the other interesting thing is sub-districts aren't required to be any type of minimum size. So as long as
I see,
they're within
okay.
the district that meets the size requirements, your sub-districts can be different sizes.
Yeah, and in fact, this whole district wouldn't have to be necessarily 15 units per acre. It's across all of the districts.
And one other question, clarifying question, any multifamily housing would have a requirement for on-site parking, is that correct?
Yes, yeah, absolutely, yes.
Just because we require it doesn't need it in the bill. The state doesn't care.
Right. Right, and so just to follow up on that, Chris had said earlier, the units that get built, this is really the units that get zoned,
That's right.
Yes.
That's what we're talking about.
right? We're not actually
How many units get allowed?
get allowed, right?
Okay. I was just gonna say, and people need to remember that for the last 50 years in the general district, we've allowed 3 units by right in existing structures. And if you look around town, there's not a whole bunch of those. So the zoning doesn't necessarily mean developers will come in. But they could.
No,
Can you just go over what the parking requirements are, and if a lot does not meet that, then it can't be built, I assume. And then just clarifying if you're gonna go over what the densities are in the sub-districts later or now.
We haven't done to
we
that.
don't know what the densities, this is a very complicated math problem that we have to solve.
Okay, so this is just high level.
High level at the
Okay.
moment.
It's a boundary discussion. What are the boundaries of the district?
Our next meeting next week, we will discuss
Data.
the actual, how Plain working with the model, which I will send to the planning board. I believe you have got it. And can work and adjust the densities so that we can have higher densities in some areas and lower in others. So we will discuss that in greater detail at next week's meeting.
And as for parking, we can require whatever parking we think is reasonable. The underlying zoning is 1.5 spaces per unit. Like the rest of the town, I suspect that's a logical place to begin, but we might adjust it.
And that's what was assumed in the calculations that were performed. It's
So-
1.5 per unit.
So though it doesn't go through a special permit, we could as a town say, no, you can't build if they don't have adequate parking.
Correct.
The way the overlay district works is it sets the requirements. There's no special permit, no variance from those special requirements in the overlay district. So if we say you have to have 1.5 parking spaces per unit, you can only build the number of units that can handle the 1.5 parking space per unit. If you want to go outside the parameters of the overlay district, now you go back to the original zoning and you're under what's ever in that underlying zoning, which is when you could have a special permit or a variance. But that's under the existing zoning, not
Multifamily.
the overlay district. Very complicated.
You want to take
Yeah.
public comment?
Some public, is anyone from the public?
Mary, can you, Gail and Mary, maybe you're both on, if you see raised hands?
Trying to see where I
Are
see
you on
those.
as host?
You want to ask people in the room.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, sure, people in the room, I don't see any raised hands, but. Oh, there's one, Gary.
You said the minimum
Actually,
contiguous,
can you state your name?
Gary Gilbert, 11 Magnolia Ave. You said the minimum contiguous district you could make was 38 acres or so, I think, right?
No,
No.
18.5.
Sorry, 18, my memories. But then later it said 5 acres was the minimum size district.
That's,
Why are those?
so you can have a number of districts, one of them has to be 18.5 acres. But the others can be as small as 5 acres.
And the 18.5 is actually 50% of your total area. So if you were to add a lot of acreage in the LCD, like if you use 20 acres out there plus what's in town, then your single contiguous zoning district would increase in size. Which is one reason why we've done what we did, is to not have that grow exponentially.
Was that clear?
Did you get that?
Well, the way I understand it, it's a range from 5 to 18.5 the way it stands.
Yes.
5 is a minimum of 18.5. One of them has to be at least that.
And we have to do at least 37 altogether.
Each district has to be 5.
I'm sure you're doing a fine job. I just wanted
Clarifying
Yeah.
question, if I may. So the minimum acres for a single contiguous zoning district, that has to be within the half-mile radius of the station
No.
area?
Can be
No,
anywhere.
it can be anywhere.
14.2, no, 14.8 acres.
Oh, you've got it right there underneath. Okay, thank you.
And we deliberately did not take 14.8 acres in the LCD, because that would all be new construction, new units. Whereas keeping it in here, we have reduced the number of new units that can be built.
All right, any
And it's
more?
that first district within the half, oh, wait a minute, maybe that's your half mile.
Yes, it is.
It's all within the half, that first district is all within a half
Yes,
mile.
all of it and all of the others.
Part of Newport Park is outside,
Well, it's,
but
It's on the boundary.
it's close enough. And the whole of the 18.5 doesn't have to be within the circle. As long as we've got 14 and something inside the circle, which we certainly do.
Should we go to the next district?
I guess if there's no,
Is there anybody,
Nobody else?
Gail, do you see anybody?
No, no hands up at the moment.
okay, all right, let's move on to the next district.
The next district is, as you can see in red, is the, Summer Street, Beach to C Street, Valentine Mover properties. Now we're talking about the 5-acre districts. And, as, Ann just mentioned, this and the next district were added because what we're trying to do is trying to limit the total number of units that would be built in the LCD, because every unit built there is a new unit in the community. So this area is just over the 5-acre minimum. It does include the Summer Street Apartments condo directly across the street from the train station, which I believe is about 43 units.
39.
30, okay. The assessors, it was 42
Oh, that's
or
interesting.
43, but, so it includes that and a few single-family homes, so it already has a large number of units on there, close to 50 in total, 45 or so. If this was zoned at 15 units an acre, the most that could be put on here would be 75 units, so the difference is not a large number. If we go to the next slide, you will see that the target parcels is the housing development across from the train station, down to include the gas station on the corner and convenience store on the corner. The parcels across the street on either side of the railroad tracks, the committee felt it was important to retain those commercial uses. It's a large area that has no residential units there. And so if that was zoned at 15 units an acre, all those units would be new units in the community. Also, as you can see in blue, it's directly adjacent to the currently mapped flood zone, which could be expanded when new flood maps are ever released. So again, we tried to stay away from that. So in order to obtain 5 acres, also above that on the map, the green is the local historic district. So it kind of pushed us up Summer Street and around C Street to get the 5 acres. So that's how the additional land that's in the blue came to be.
I think the other interesting thing of note is the fact that it includes the electrical substation, which is unlikely.
Then that's not exempt.
No,
No, for some reason,
not municipal.
may end up being.
Private.
exempt, but
Uh-huh.
That's actually listed in the guidelines as it would be exempt, electrical.
Well, again, it's not a piece of excluded land, so.
The state has list or maps
There's a
that we
difference,
have.
there's different categories.
But yeah, so that's interesting that the mapping is different than the guidelines.
Any other questions, comments from the board members? From the audience?
So in, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
In the act today, in that blue additional parcels on the right side, there really are only a couple of homes. And the old mover property. So again, if you think about it, I guess some of those could be built, but that somebody would be, I guess in order for somebody to, for the property to be built to another thing that's currently a single family home.
mhm.
Somebody has to, A, be willing to sell it. And then somebody has to be willing to buy it and develop it for that purpose. So, so it's not, those things have to happen for it to,
And I think that if you're talking smaller size lots, I think Denny can chime in as to what's financially feasible. But in a lot of the downtown area, you'd have to purchase a lot of individually owned lots, which is less likely than if it's like a large lot. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think the intent of the committee is to make it as hard as where somebody might develop, make it as difficult as possible. So as an example, if a developer has to come in and assemble 5 lots, it's 5 times harder than buying 1 lot. And the smaller, and we've also tried to focus on small lots with the same intent, thereby making it much more difficult for a developer to actually put in effect a development.
But that's not to say that we're not encouraging, for example, renovation of a 1-family to a 3-family by an individual owner. So what we want to see is development that is over time and piecemeal, because that's what the character of the town is.
This zone does have one area that's of moderate size, which is the current, the Seaside convenience store and gas station. And
Yes,
It's not.
that'd be nice to have that redeveloped in something.
I'm sorry, I'm anti-gas station. Having a gas station as a centerpiece of our downtown is not very attractive.
I think the architects would agree. Yes, Laura.
So, so the gas station is the smaller blue parcel, is that right?
No, the
No,
gas
no,
station is
It's
the,
in
Oh,
red.
it's part of the red, okay.
Just below.
You may want to consider it. Lauren.
It's the gas station plus Stanley's Garage,
Yeah.
That's
that
right.
whole corner.
How big is that lot?
Not very good.
Half an acre.
So that could
That's
Seven,
7, yeah.
That-
which would be fit in with the other condos that are already there.
And what is the moving parcel? Where is that?
It's at the
There's
far
the railroad
right.
tracks.
Am I correct?
yes, right there.
Because it was once a moving,
Yeah. it's-
Company or
it's
something?
Moving storage, yeah.
we don't know.
Okay.
Originally, it was grain storage.
No, okay. It's kind of a-
Grain storage?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
They transported it on the railroad.
And up the creek.
Wow.
Uh.
Interesting. Chuck?
Yeah, Chuck Wisner, 16 Highland Avenue. Given that the umbrella of the state thing is to encourage multifamily housing, right? The balancing act you're doing here of creating lots that are difficult to build is sort of like contradictory to the overall umbrella. Will the state sort of read into that, or will they have a
So I
say on
think,
that?
I think what, yeah, they will. They have to approve this eventually. And we're going to submit it to them in advance of town meeting so
Yeah.
that they have a chance to comment. But I think the state has got a bunch of, they're balancing things also. They don't want to destroy the downtown either.
Yeah, okay.
So I think they're leaving it up to us to figure out how best to accommodate the need for new housing
And take care of
and
it.
taking care of the character of the town, yeah.
And I think I might correct your statement to say, we don't want big developments downtown. We don't want any large thing, but what Chris was just saying about encouraging 3-family, 4-family. You know, yes, absolutely. That's the way the town has had infill happen incrementally over time.
And I think the state model is a mathematical exercise. And that they can't really go outside of that when they've got 177
Right.
communities to deal with. So they're not looking at the current use for the underlying
They
parcel.
won't deep dive into how
Nope.
difficult.
Hopefully not.
Hopefully not.
They don't have the data to do that.
No.
They can't tell that some of these lots are full of rocks and ledge and can't be built on.
Erica,
I have a question about the, going back to Stanley's garage, that parcel. Why do you have a logic that you think it's automatic that if it is included, then it can't be mixed use? I don't understand that. And I think that that particular lot would really take away from the downtown if it were converted into only residences.
We can't require mixed use.
Yeah, I know that. I'm wondering what logic
I think
leads
we
you to
can
believe
allow
that
it.
if you
We
zone
can
it,
certainly
it
allow
will
it.
be built with only residential.
We can give incentives.
No,
I'm still asking the same question.
Yeah.
What is the logic that makes you say that somehow it's going to be 100% residential?
no, it's not required to be 100% residential.
Okay, so
Um,
therefore, why the logic of removing commercial?
We
areas?
just cannot require that the first floor be commercial.
Yes,
and
I
that
understand that.
We can't require that.
Then
But,
why
but if they
stay away
choose
from
to,
commercial? That's my question, I
yeah,
guess.
if they choose to, they could,
Yeah.
like the next building up that has some commercial on the first floor and apartments upstairs.
Yeah, which would,
They could,
wonderful.
yeah, exactly. It's a beautiful building. They could do the same thing on that corner, comply with the MBTA density for housing and still put commercial because that's allowed in the underlying district. So,
Hello, my hand's up.
oh,
Gail.
okay,
The last two people who spoke, I did not get their names. I'm sorry.
sorry, Gail, Erica Brown, 57 Brook Street.
Oh, thank you, Erica.
and who's the
And the
other?
gentleman,
Oh, Chuck Wisner, 16 Highland Avenue.
thank you.
John,
Yeah, if I may just make a comment on.
Can you identify yourself?
Yeah,
Name and
John
address.
Harden, 54 School Street. I think the fear is that some of our commercial area that we enjoy
Yes.
could be bought by someone else and made 100% residential, because that would be the most profitable thing for a developer to do. And that is a risk that we would take if we identified one of those areas as part of the zone. I think that's the logic. But by the way, I think that is the best spot for multifamily housing, Beach Street building, but maybe someone will do it one day.
Sarah,
So to just take Erica's, or this thread a little bit further, it seems to me that what we concurrently or subsequently might want to do is to change the underlying zoning so that we require or encourage commercial on the first floor with housing above it in the areas, so that we continue to have a commercial part of downtown. So that's an example of where underlying zoning would encourage or require, depending on how it's framed, that use, and that in that particular parcel, multifamily would be allowed by right, but only to a point if you have the certain requirements. And then if not, the underlying zoning would.
yeah, we actually entertained the idea of a multifamily district, mixed use district. But the complication of getting that drafted in time to meet our schedule, we just said, let's get this done, and then
Yeah, then do that second.
next year we can start talking about something more complicated.
The problem was there were too many restrictions
Mhm.
in the MBTA zoning law. And it seemed like if you really want to accomplish what you wanted, you needed to do it outside of the MBTA zoning and at a later time because we're running out of time.
Sandy,
If I'm remembering right, Sarah, the way the MBTA zoning looks at requiring mixed use is if you require it, it is then not a MBTA district. You can count the units, but not the acreage.
yes, Laura.
two questions. If that red parcel is zoned for multifamily housing, it seems to me that we're going to need some possibly design standards for where that constrain where parking happens, because you could imagine, I mean, the historic buildings that are left on that parcel are quite a close relationship with the street in their scale and how they address the street, and you could put a number of multifamily housing, which might be a desirable use for that parcel as a use. But if that means the parking is up against the street and then you've got parking lots lining down your downtown, that is not a desirable outcome, it seems to me. So if there's, so I have that question about the red parcel in general.
Mhm.
So hopefully the design standards committee are thinking about those kind of urbanistic moves.
Yes, they are.
We'll hear about those. My other question is, this is a lot of, it's a very close granular look at the downtown, which is great. It doesn't seem to me we're going in the other direction in the half mile. There's a big part we're not looking at. So could you just talk about that when you,
The big part,
there's a sort of, I guess, to the southeast, if we back up to the map?
Mhm. Yeah.
So kind of headed down.
Are you headed down there to talk about that?
Down toward the beach.
Towards the beach, yeah. So
Oh,
that's all
well.
within the half mile. So could you
Oh.
talk about why you're not?
so,
looking
okay,
at those
so,
areas?
so here we go. The reason that we're not picking places like in Zone E is because the minimum lot size in those districts is 2 acres. And 2 acres at 15 units, they're talking about a pretty good sized project all of a sudden, out of scale with the rest of the town. So we are trying to avoid places where there are big lots, let's be perfectly honest.
So everything within the half mile, we're looking at very granular scale.
Yes. There are a couple of pretty good sized parcels,
Mhm.
so it's not all granular.
Yeah, and historically, some of the larger parcels, I think, were hotels or other, I mean, going way back. But they're,
Could well be. Interestingly enough, though, some of the densest development in town, which is way over 15 units per acres. For example, 1 to 3 School Street, there are 13 units on a tiny piece of land, and
Yeah.
the density is, I don't know, 80 units an acre or something.
Yeah.
So.
Could I ask, and then there,
it's-
Liz has her hand, Liz, it doesn't say last name, but Liz has her hand up. So I guess the same topic, but jumping back to the prior area, there's commercial on Elm Street.
Yes,
Are we not concerned about protecting that?
we're a little concerned, yes, but,
It doesn't have the character of some of the other commercial.
yeah, they're not
areas
historic
downtown.
buildings, it's the bicycle shop and some architect's offices.
So,
I know the,
so the only ones you're protecting in town are within the historic district?
No.
No, there are others too,
Okay, so,
like Crosby's, for example. We're protecting Crosby, we don't want that pulling down and turned into condos.
but I'm just trying to get what the argument is and be able to do it across the board, like is it, or are you doing it scenario by
As
scenario?
I said in the beginning, we're trying to balance things, it's not gonna be, we don't have these strict rules, we have to do this and do that, we're trying to do the best we can to accommodate these different, often competing constraints on how we want the town to accommodate these things.
And in the Elm Street area, you have Sawmill Circle, which nobody's gonna come in and redevelop that. You have a bunch of condos along the left side of Elm Street. And we wanted to include Powder House Lane, because that's lots of density, and there's room to put more.
Yeah, my question was strictly for the commercial aspect of the discussion that we were just having.
It'd be great if we could be totally consistent with every argument, I don't think we'd be able to do this if we were that strict with ourselves.
we have a question online from Liz.
Liz?
Hello, Liz Colbert, 22 C Street. I have a two-part question. So if C Street's being grouped with Summer Street, which does have commercial, is there any circumstance where we could potentially have commercial on C Street is my first question. And the second is the two properties at the end of C Street if a developer bought both of them, they'd be just under 5 acres. So just wondering how many potential units could go there and how many potential units on the Tappan Street warehouse. Just, this is a single family residence area. I was just curious how many units the neighborhood could potentially see if it was redeveloped. Thank you very much.
Okay, the first question, the underlying zoning for C Street is for residential, so there is no way anyone can do any commercial on C Street. The second question, actually, the entire district is 5 acres, so I think I'm not sure what a reasonable assembly of parcels somebody might be able to come up with a.
It looks like the Valentine parcel is about a little under a half an acre. And the 2 residential parcels along C, it's a little hard to treat, but they look like they're maybe 2/3 of an acre together.
Okay, so if somebody were to combine all those together, of course, there'd be a railroad track between them. And again, the density may not be 15 units an acre. We may find that we can have less density there by increasing the density somewhere else.
Gail has her hand up.
Yes,
Oh, I
Gail.
put it down, I thought. Sorry. Down, mine's down.
Okay. Any other public comments? All right, Mark.
Okay, again, we looked at several of the areas, but this is an area we tried to find another 5-acre area that had a fair number of units on it to target in order to limit the total number of new units that would have to be developed in the LCD. This particular district runs from the corner of Allen and Summer Street, where there's a commercial condo building, to include the condos along the end of Brook Street, running up Summer, all the way to the other gas station at the corner of Lincoln Street. So if we go to the next slide, we'll see how we targeted the existing condo properties, which are the one at the beginning of Allen Street and the ones along Brook Street. And then we targeted the other properties, one being the gas station, and then 3 other properties are 2 families on very small lots, so they're not likely to be redeveloped. And then the connecting parcels are the ones in between, which gives us that minimum of 5 acres. So that is how we arrived at that. Also on this map, I put a different overlay, which is the water resource protection districts, which you can see in green and red at the very top of the screen, and in blue at the bottom. And I think the actual zones got cut off, but I think it's zone 1, 2, and 3. And so the
Green,
gas station, what?
green is 2.
Is 2. So the gas station is in 2, and if this ever got, so that's a bit of a concern, having the gas station there. You never know when there might be, an accidental release. So if that got redeveloped at some point in the future, that was deemed as a desirable thing for watershed protection. So that's how we arrived at this.
Okay, questions?
Last question.
Yes.
Since we've already talked about 2 gas stations that potentially could get redeveloped, I would assume, but correct me if I'm wrong, that any zoning changes waives any kind of state environmental rules or law, right?
Correct, absolutely
They'll still
correct.
have to be applied.
Yes. Any other questions?
How many units, sorry, how many units are in this, Brook Street, condo development?
Don't know that answer.
Okay,
Two per
I'll tell you
building.
actually in a second. Is it two?
I'm just curious. And then the other comment, following up on Laura's comment, I think is really a good one about parking behind, and you can see that's a really nice example where they put the parking behind. Same with 10 to 12 Summer Street where the parking is behind.
Mhm.
And you can see the real, if you were to, in your mind, flip it with parking along the street, it really is both are nice examples of why that should be a design standard.
Yeah, so those are two per unit, two per building, so that's 12 units there. The building that's on the corner of Summer Street and that commercial building is a commercial condo building.
Is that the old
And-
Cricket?
Yes.
Okay.
And it includes.
The original cricket.
Yeah, there we go.
The
Yeah,
old
original
cricket, the old cricket is next to the 1669 cemetery.
This is
And we
the original.
deliberately, deliberately excluded that because it's a large parcel.
61.
I think there's also residential on that commercial condo. I think there's a residential.
Oh,
home there
okay,
also.
well, there are six units.
Yeah.
There might be, but there are 6 units in that first building on the corner there, so. And then, those other 3 little red ones are 2 families. Actually, one has 3, sorry. First one, where the arrow next, under the blue arrow has 3.
Yeah,
Another, yes, one also opposite the gas station has 3. So there are, out of those, just right there, 12, 6 is 18, 20, plus the 6 is 26
Okay.
in that district already.
Questions from the public? No?
Gail has her hand up, but I don't know if it's from.
Gail, is your hand up?
And Sarah Pierce.
Sarah Pierce has just raised her
Oh,
hand.
okay, Sarah.
No, my hand's not up.
Okay,
Okay.
Sarah's is.
Hi, thank you very much for taking my question. I just wonder, in the downtown area, everything outside of the LCD, have you decided on a height cap or a height limitation?
We haven't finalized it, but we know it's not gonna be more than 3 stories. 3.5, I'm sorry, 3.5 stories.
3.5 stories in the downtown?
And it might be different in different sub-districts. So we might allow 3.5 stories on Powder House Lane, for example.
Oh, okay. So when will you be coming out with the information on where those will be?
The next couple of weeks, we're gonna have to come up with, let me explain why this is important. Every story that you put on a building adds residential units and increases the density. It means that we don't have to zone someplace else with a lower density.
Oh, I
So-
understand that. I just think that it definitely does not keep within preserving the town for the way it's built and the historical character. The small seaside town, 3.5 stories is pretty tall.
Well, believe it or not, there are some 3.5 story buildings in the downtown.
Yeah, there are a couple. I just think if we start, I mean, again, it would be nice to see when they'll be, so I'll stay tuned to see where you're gonna put those. That would be great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good, okay. Laura, yes.
There's a kind of similar spatial question about what, the density of the lot and whether you need to go up or out, and parking is a gigantic eater of real estate.
Yeah.
So if the task force is thinking about the requirements for the number of parking spaces for these multifamily units, it would behoove us to think about something less than what the underlying zoning would require for a couple of reasons. One is we try not to overpay, right? We're in water resource districts, we're in a dense downtown that has a historical character that was developed before there were cars. And so that's part of what creates our very tight-knit downtown community. And surface parking is the antithesis of what that feels like. Also, the more parking that you're requiring, and if you need to meet these density requirements, that's gonna send you up because you gotta be on a smaller footprint, so you've gotta go higher. So there's some balance there that has to be looked at.
Yeah.
And I think the intent of multifamily housing within a transit district is that people have different kinds of families, single parent families, older families, there might be all kinds of reasons, a single person family, there might be all kinds of reasons why someone living in a unit like that would not want or need two cars. And so I think just kind of being open to those kinds of discussion would help
Absolutely.
us actually realize some of these units and keep that granular scale that we're really, I can see we're trying very hard to do, and I understand that. I get that we want to keep that fabric of the town, but it'd be also nice to actually provide some more housing and some more diversity of choice of housing. And I just think parking is a real, for ecological and environmental and urban scale, issues. It's, we should try to minimize it to a reasonable number that's not more than what a unit would require.
So it's a very good point. Interestingly enough, the way the computer model works, that's gonna grade us. It assigns 1,000 square feet per unit. And then it kind of automatically says if it's a 3-story height limit, you can put 3 units on 1,000 square foot footprint. And then our setback requirements and our lot coverage requirements generally is bigger than what the parking would require anyway. So as we toy with the model, we find that adding parking doesn't really change anything to the density that we're talking about. It's more about.
Or taking it away. Doesn't
Uh-huh.
change it.
Yeah. But it does have an impact on the landscape.
But it
and the
would
fabric.
be covered, I think, in our design guidelines.
Yeah, the architects are gonna have something to say about that.
Yeah, but it's a zoning question too, right?
It is a zoning question,
That's
yes.
number of spaces per
Yeah,
unit.
yeah. More questions? Okay, let's move on to the final district.
Okay, so the final district. So one of the reasons why we, besides doing a required large 18-acre piece along Pine Street, and doing the additional 2 5-acre pieces, was to limit the size of the area in the LCD, because every new unit that gets created in the LCD is a new unit in the community. So by adding 2 5-acre pieces, we're now at a total of close to 30 acres, or maybe even, so we only need an additional 7 acres. I think we're like at 31. So we only need an additional 7 acres. So the it's called the Kelvin
Yeah, and
Kelvin.
to make it so people understand, it's the K-band storage.
Yes. Yes. Yes, it's the storage property. Yeah, so this is the area. It's, remember, we have to zone an entire parcel. We can't zone a piece of a property. So this property is, assessors has it at 6.8 acres. Other things have it at 7, slightly over 7. So this parcel kind of fits the requirement. It is already developed with a storage facility on there. It is not in the wetlands, it's not in the floodplain, although it does border the property. As you can see, to the west and north a little bit. That's all a kind of a swampy marsh. It would be subject to filing with the Conservation Commission because it's adjacent to wetlands, but it is not excluded from development. Obviously, it's quite fully developed today. So
Somebody said disturbed would be the word.
yes, it is very disturbed. And so this is the property that we decided would kind of fit the bill. And again, depending on the final numbers of units that the other districts would get zoned for the balance of our 500, and this would get zoned for the balance of our 550 units, so that we do comply with the law, so.
Okay. I noticed people chatting. Any chats on-
Yeah, Jonathan Keefe has his hand raised, but maybe we'll come as.
So, just for the record, we're not accepting chats. Under the public meeting law, we can't really.
It was just to see how he wanted to identify that his hand was raised.
Oh, okay, fine. And we'll start with the board, and John will come to you shortly. Anyone? Any comments on this? Okay, John, go ahead. John Keefe?
Are you muted?
I got two things. Can you hear me on one of these? I got two things unmuted now.
No, you're fine. No, we can hear you fine.
Okay, great. Yeah. So thank you. Thanks for all the hard work you guys are doing. I think there's some good, really good thought here. I guess the question I had, because there's a lot of, oh, that'll never, that probably won't happen. That probably won't happen sort of conversation. And I don't disagree. Probably a lot of things, will probably pretty much stay the same. But I'm wondering, is there some intention to do some financial analytics around the zones, and then the sort of, if you will, some probabilistic methods to think about, okay, what is the property worth? What's the cost to demo? What's the cost to build? And, it's to start to say more than likely or not. For example, you talked about, Stanley's garage, and I'm not saying it's likely, but as an example, people think, well, that one might become one. So for example, I'm looking at a couple of properties out on Pine Street. Let's see, 30 Pine Street and 34 Pine Street. They're owned by somebody called Tom Ford LLC. Those two lots are 1.4 acres, and the lot next to it is about over half an acre. So there's like 2 acres plus with only 3 houses on it. To me, it feels like that's an area where someone could scrape the houses and put up, 20 some odd units on Pine Street. So I'm just curious if you're looking at that sort of probabilistic method of construction costs versus, acquisition costs, and sort of heat mapping where these developments are most likely to take place. Again, knowing that in many cases, it wouldn't make a lot of sense to assemble a bunch of lots to add for, a couple of units.
So the answer to your question is yes. In fact, RKG, which is part of the partner as a consultant, specializes in doing this kind of analysis, and we're hoping to get a proposal from them to do exactly what you suggested, which is to look at every parcel and come up with a likelihood of development on it based on costs and size and all the factors that go into a developer's decision.
Another question from DF.
Yes, hi. Thank you so much. This is Donna Ferris from 8 Blossom Lane. Thank you guys very much. Just a quick question on, so currently right now in the LCD, we do not have zoning for residential. And I think Mark, thank goodness, like he explained something earlier, which made more sense to me. The question I have is, so if it's right now zoned for 6.8, potentially 6.8 to 7 acres, which roughly, if it was 15 units per acre, would come out to about 105 multifamily units. In your description, Mark, that you put out, which all these districts, it was really, really great. Thank you very much. We were talking a little bit about workforce housing for employees of cell signaling, potential for senior housing, assisted living facilities. So my question would be, like right now, nothing is zoned for residential, but if we zone it as an overlay for the 40A, would that mean the 105 would have to be the multifamily, and then they can add more on of the other stuff if they wanted to do it? Or it doesn't have to be 105 multifamily, it can be 50 multifamily, and then it can be
senior housing and affordable housing. I was just trying to see like, if it's really 105 multifamily, and then they would just expand on that, which would mean that there would actually be more units, but just different. I just wanted some clarification if that's possible. Thank you very much.
Okay, so there are two answers to that. The first is, no, it's just that you can't add more units than what are allowed under the zoning. So whether they're assisted living units or they're workforce housing units or mansions, you're only gonna be allowed a certain number. The second part of this is that we're going to use this district as, what do you call it?
The catch-all.
A catch-all. So we're gonna try to do the zoning to get the best deal for the downtown we can, that everybody's gonna agree to, and then whatever's left, we're going to say, that's the density, that's the number of units that can go on the Calvin property. It might be 105, it might be 72, it might be 137, we don't know until we do all the balancing and figure out what the rest of the downtown's gonna be able to accommodate.
Oh, I understand that, Chris. Thank you very, very much. But in the description that I think this was Mr. Resnick who had written, he said that the district was selected as it could become a possible location for senior housing or
Sure.
even assisted living facilities. So I guess my
Those are all multifamily uses, so.
so see, but you can't have senior housing as a multifamily use, right? That's like an
Yeah,
age.
yeah, of course you can have senior housing. You can't require it, but it could certainly be done.
Okay, okay. So I just, again, so just saying that is really important, I think, for people to understand. I mean, I'm on a lot of these meetings and I'm still asking these questions. So making sure that that's known is really important, that when you think of multifamily, I don't think senior housing, you know what I'm saying? So I think that's really important to mention. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for asking the question. Yes, Mary.
Could you clarify senior housing? So I assume there couldn't be an age limit. So how is it senior housing?
So the developer can put any age, he can put any limits on it he wants to. We can't. So if somebody comes in and wants to build senior housing,
They can do it.
they can do it. We're not gonna require them to do senior housing, but if they wanna do senior housing, they certainly are capable of doing it.
So, and as a planning board, we've gone round and round on this senior housing or senior facility.
Either one.
The definition, our definition in zoning, for example, says assisted living is a residential use. And so is senior housing. All
In our
residential
current
uses.
zoning, I think it's
Current zoning.
for,
In the definitions.
okay, so I think that's important. So senior housing, so it could be senior housing or senior facility. With the overlay setbacks and heights and, okay.
Yes, Sarah.
Oh, sorry, Laura had her hand up first.
Laura.
So thinking about the LCD parcel and our goals about affordable housing, which I know we can't require as a zoning overlay, but there is a percentage requirement, right, with
Yes,
affordable
yes.
housing. So have we looked at just doing the modeling of if you were to max out that, and so you're gonna get to some number of units depending on what you want the downtown to do, but if you were all to look at sort of the minimum and the maximum, how many affordable units could we realize as part of that multifamily housing? And it would be great to know how close that gets us to our goal of meeting the affordable housing, because there's,
It's not going to.
does it get, where,
Well-
where is it though?
We're at 5.4%.
So, we can, by the law, require 10, we don't have to, but we
Right.
can require 10%
Right,
the affordable.
yeah,
We can get a feasibility study done that says 20%.
yeah,
So if Danvers got theirs approved, so I'm sure we
Okay.
probably can too.
yeah,
So we can require 20%.
yeah,
So for every unit that's built today, we have to create, every 10 units, we have to create an affordable unit.
right.
But if we're doing 20%, then we're actually gonna gain a
Right.
little bit.
Except that we're targeting small developments.
Well.
And the rest we are, but here.
Here,
How many
can
can we
really
get,
do it.
how many can we get here? How many
So
affordable
let's say
units?
we did 100, we said, or 100 units,
So you could get 20.
20 units,
potentially.
yes.
Yeah.
exactly.
And would that relieve the pressure on, I mean, the 40B is its own thing. I know there are, we've got this issue, right, where we can get unfriendly developments coming in. How far does that get us towards?
Not very far,
Meeting
but
that.
it's a start.
It
Yeah,
could be a 40B.
And we could get a 40B anywhere, and a friendly 40B, the way 10 and 12 Summer Street is.
the difference being this is a disturbed parcel and it is a more appropriate place for
Powder
development.
House Lane
Yeah.
is already affordable, so
Yeah.
any additions there are gonna be affordable probably. Newport Park, some of it will certainly be affordable, so.
Right.
Yes.
On that same vein, can this particular district have a bonus? So if you made it 30% affordable, you get an extra some number of units?
Yeah, we could do that.
Potentially.
We could do that.
So that would be the place to do that. And then, sort of to Mary's prior question, I assume that the multifamily zoning could also say townhouses for the general public with unrestricted residence and, an apartment building type thing if it was senior housing. So uses that incentivize certain kinds of uses, maybe get a different style of architecture.
We could certainly in our,
Yeah.
we could
It's a
certainly,
public meeting.
we could certainly have guidelines designed for different uses.
Yeah.
For sure, yeah.
Um,
I'll say Mike first and then Ryan.
Yeah, just, give me some latitude if I'm not getting the vernacular right, but with the RKG study, are they gonna do what I would call an economic impact analysis? In other words,
They can do-
X new units produces X dollars in incremental property tax revenue, but on the flip side, it has
They
X
could,
dollars.
and we've asked them for a proposal on that as well, yes.
I think that's hugely important.
I guess it is. I'm not sure how it guides us necessarily, but,
It's not even about guiding, it's just making everybody aware of
well, I think
like,
for that reason, it's probably a good idea, yes.
because I've done my own modeling and it's big numbers. Not the good way.
Yes,
Are you ready?
yep.
Lorraine Iavani, 28 Pine Street, and I just want to echo what Mike is saying. Basically, I think that's useful data, and I know I've asked, for some of it myself. It's just useful to know if we're going to do this, what's the impact on the taxpayer? I think that's reasonable. And the second thing is, I do concur with Sarah. If we're going to do this, we need to get something from it. And of course, as you know, Chris, I'm very interested in development of, we're calling it senior housing. We shouldn't say age restricted in this case, but with the rest of the team on the design guidelines and also whoever may be involved, I think a multitude of different types of housing, if we're going to do this in the LCD, seems very rational. And I think that as a town, we need to advocate that if we're going to do this, we need to get something back. So I think they're asking us to do an awful lot here. I see what all of you have done. It is a mathematical calculation. That's the bottom line, but we're taxpayers and also we're residents. So let's get something out of it. And let's also provide, when you're ready to go forward with this to town meeting, let's provide some other data that says, look, we're going to do this, but don't be afraid, or maybe be afraid, I don't know yet. Here's what the impact is. So that's my contribution. for tonight. Thank you.
It's scary.
Gary Gilbert, 11 Magnolia Ave. I was gonna end our presentation with this, but I think it's a good point to mention. The LCD, we've only just started as a team to start focusing on what it would look like at 15 units an acre. But it's a perfect opportunity where you could allow through the design guidelines, and we've been toying with different variables there. But the classic way is to allow an extra floor of building height if we get some of the things we want, like workers' housing, 20% affordable housing, downtown, you could provide perks if you get mixed use commercial on the first floor, but you could allow perhaps greater lot coverage. You could allow an extra story in height where we think we can digest that. And through that sort of upzoning, they call it, this is a commonly used mechanism that does work, it is effective. So some of these goals, we have the best place to obtain some of them is in that small little parcel. I would almost rather see it be bigger, but a bit bigger, but because it's the place where these kind of uses, we could more realistically see them actually occur.
Mhm. Fair enough.
Do you want to jump to the good design?
I guess, is that the segue to the design guidelines?
Yeah, before we fall asleep.
Do you have a presentation?
Yeah, I have a brief.
Do I need to share that? Do I need to give you permission? Are you online?
I'm online. If I hit share screen,
Wait a minute, I think I have to do something.
Is that the one?
I know.
Click on three buttons at the top of his name.
Oh,
Click on those and you should be
I
able
don't, is it Christine?
Participants.
You Christine, or you Gary?
I thought I changed my name. It should be me.
Oh, there we are. All right. That should work.
Okay.
So can I introduce you all?
What?
I said, you go, Sarah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm. Yeah.
Okay. Watch, don't trip
We're
on.
gonna be gone as soon as she gets there.
Okay, they're in
Okay.
the office across.
So let me introduce Gary Gilbert, Chuck Wisner, and John Harden. All are residents of the town. All three have got backgrounds in architecture. And all three have been working on trying to create design guidelines that we can apply to our overlay districts. So Gary, why don't you start off with your slideshow?
Okay, this is a work in progress, and we were asked to do just a brief presentation of it. You don't have you have a written text of design guidelines themselves with the language and such, but that's not being distributed today. We're just going to show some slides and talk about some of our concepts. At the very beginning of this, we started with something that had never been actually written up before, which was the town character statement. And it made it clear to us what we love about the town. It's got an intimate feel to it. It's the buildings are charming. There's a lot of historic structures, and it has a lot of classic New England features like a commons, a couple of beautiful churches, and our town center. And then there's the ocean. So what we benefit from is the topography that we're wrapped around the ocean, and the hills that sort of force the buildings to be more intimate and close together. We have mixed historical buildings, so we have a heterogeneous architectural styles, federal, craftsman, Victorian, etc. But there is a certain homogeneity to that. And we benefit from those historic building styles because they have architectural elements to them that make them human scale and pleasant. Like they have a base, middle, and top. They all have different versions of covered entries, recessed entries, dormers, pitched roofs, etc. And these are the kind of elements we're focusing on in the design guidelines that we will, as best we can, require. So even a more modern building have elements like this that modulates the mass of the building and provides these features to break down the scale of the building. We end up with successful built architecture. Another thing we benefit from is the buildings happen to be close to the street. Again, I think that's because of the hills and topography, which creates street walls that give you a sense of intimacy and enclosure. One of my professors used to use the term missing teeth. We don't have too many missing teeth downtown. There's a few places like the Browns building with the bank that's perpendicular to the street, and there's a large parking lot exposed. That would be like a missing teeth. You're lacking a street wall. But in other parts of town, it's quite pleasant. So then we went and did sort of an analysis of what do we have and what do we like about it and why do we like those things about it. And we'll start with the Summer Street building, and what we felt was rather pleasant about it is it's relatively close to the street. And the massing of the building is broken up by this really huge dormer. Can you see my arrow? You can. This big bay sticking out towards the street, and then dormers on the roof, pitched roofs, and the ground floor retail is articulated differently than the residential above. How do I get to the next slide? Okay. Here's a building that is pretty unfortunate. It was originally a real slab of brick that I guess they did a partial renovation to later and put some bays into it, some entry bays and porches out front, which help somewhat. But it's a good example of why you don't want to have continuous building walls that are not modulated, that are not broken up or popping out or recessed. Some of the buildings, there's a number of buildings downtown that used to be, I think, 3 or even 4 stories tall historically, but they're now single story. And we have a mix. There's other ones taller, but there were more that were taller in the past. And the ground floor retail typically is articulated differently than the residential above. This street intersection is a good example of a part of town that would benefit by having a second or third story on those buildings. It would give a greater sense of enclosure to the street. And here's a building that's 3.5 stories. We don't particularly like the ground floor brick like that in the windows, but it's a relatively pleasant building. It has a shed roof dormer and pitched roofs, and it fits in. And here's a big anomaly, but I don't hear anybody saying it's the most ugly thing in the world. It's fine to have an anomaly here and there. And this is quite tall. This is about 4.5 stories. But again, it has dormers. It has it has a couple different types of dormers. It has a Dutch gambrel roof, and it kind of works. It's unfortunate the building across the street is just a single family with front and rear yards, so that sort of breaks up the sense of street enclosure. This is an interesting building that thankfully someone's putting a lot of money into to make it handsome, but it actually has quite a bit of density, and it's a good example of how you can get a lot of density in a building and you can tolerate this. The 15 units per acre can be done and be pleasant. And these are extremely, we're really fortunate that these were ever built. I believe these, let's see, they're 2 3-unit buildings, am I correct?
Yes,
Yes.
2 3 units and a 2-unit in the back.
And 2 unit in the back. Now, you can't force somebody to spend a lot of money on trim and corner boards, but you certainly can suggest it. And we'll talk about what we're going to do in the design guidelines to try to encourage better architecture, but this is really handsome and they deserve credit. This building up on Pleasant Street, I think, is a really good example how these buildings were originally proposed. I was on the zoning board when this was reviewed. It was originally proposed as two 2-unit buildings with 90-foot long roofs that were not broken up at all. And because we have one sentence in our District D zoning bylaw description, we were allowed with that one sentence to basically force him to break it up and make it fit into the neighborhood. And I think in the end, I've had neighbors come up to me and say they thought it was a really successful project. But it not only reads as 4 separate buildings, but there's 2 different architectural styles he used. So I consider that a success without a heavy lift. So it's possible to have design guidelines that work. These are some examples of things we don't want to see. On Desmond Ave, there's a big parking lot in front of a building that we could out and out prohibit. In the lower left is that building that's perpendicular to the street and a large parking lot, which is the kind of thing you don't want to see. And on the right, we have driveway entrances that are to the side of the building, which is an appropriate way to do it, and the parking is in the rear. So as far as design guidelines go, they're not new. They've been in place in many, many towns throughout the country, and they can be quite effective. And we broke those down into 2 parts. One would be some mandatory regulations, like you can't be taller than a certain height. And there's other dimensions in there that we're all free to discuss. It's going to be discussed, I'm sure, quite a bit. But someone asked, well, what can you do to prevent the ugly? I mean, John was asked that question. It was a really good question. So you can just say, no, you can't have a 7-story building downtown. And the state is gonna approve that for sure, because you're allowed to say some things you can do and can't do. And then there's the desired or encouraged portions of the design guidelines. So we're recommending setting up a design review committee of 5 people from the design professions ideally, and they'll have to meet our criteria satisfactorily enough that they would approve of it or provide recommendations to the planning board to approve the project. What this kind of approach has already been submitted by a similar approach by Newbury, I believe. And I don't know how the states responded to them. So it's not like we're reinventing the wheel. There's a 2.5-story norm that everyone's used to, but that is appropriate for residential neighborhoods, urban sprawl, residential neighborhoods. Downtown, I think it's reasonable to allow, say, 3.5 stories. And we say half-story because that typically implies a pitched roof. If you do, and you wouldn't be able to do a full 4th story. A 3-story flat roof structure could successfully be built downtown, as long as its massing is modulated and they conform to our other design guidelines and setbacks. One of the things about setbacks downtown is some people think, well, you want setbacks. So actually, they're detrimental, I think, we feel, to the look and feel of town. So we want to scrutinize that number and modify slightly from our existing bylaws. The length, we would regulate the length of unbroken roofs. You can't have more than, say, 50 feet without having some sort of an offset, either or a perpendicular roof coming in or the ridge being raised or lowered. And then let's see, and then I mentioned earlier, you can build into these incentives such as building height and lot coverage. Even just an extra 10% of lot coverage could be enough to really get what you want out of a developer. And there's this in the required suggested areas where you can maybe best do it, since we're under crunch for time, we don't have a huge budget to hire consultants to do drawings. We may show a number of photos as part of the document, showing a developer what we want to see. And generally speaking, if you show developers what you want, they want to get their stuff approved in 6 to 9 months, not a year and a half. So they tend to want to give you what you want to some extent, as long as the numbers work for them. So it would be nice to show there are examples of how you can design 2 or 3 story buildings that look like a single family home. There's plenty of examples of that. And I'd like to try to get some images of that in our text. When we went to the LCD, which we still have more work to do there, but we first tried to see, we took 2 basic approaches or paradigms as to how to build there. One would be the more massive blocks. That's a place where maybe we could tolerate a blocky multifamily building. So one approach is that we would have maybe parking, either on surface parking or parking at the 1st floor and then 3 stories above it. Another approach, which I really like, I should preface this by saying, I feel personally very strongly that the town has always considered that their backyard where they sort of throw their refuse, perhaps. And I think we should, if we're going to allow development there or encourage it, we want to make it a place we're proud of. I firmly believe that. So if we break up clusters, if we did like stacked townhouses, 3.5 stories there in clusters around quads or common spaces, and we're we can't design it for them, but we're going to try to give you guys a couple of images of how these two different approaches might look. And then we've got to work with the town planner to figure out how we can craft zoning bylaws that'll encourage what we want to see. And we could have sort of clustered, semi-attached, semi-detached structures there in a little neighborhood. And I think the town would be quite happy in the end. So there's more work to be done. I hope is that enough, guys? Is it what?
Yeah, the only thing I want to add is the overall the arching sort of driver of the decisions that we made in the design guidelines was that we aren't a Nantucket. We don't want to be a Nantucket. And we aren't a Lexington where we have a main street that just, goes on for 8 blocks. We have this unique townscape. And when I say townscape, what it means is you can drive through Manchester and you go around a corner and then there's a surprise. Or you go around a corner and a building stops your eye. And that's what defines, that's where really makes the character of the town, including the topography. So we want to encourage that. We don't want to diminish that. We want to say, how do we take care of those special opportunities?
And yeah, can I just add one more thing? One of the purposes for why we were doing this and why we were asked to do it is to provide the town with some tools. So that if there's a design review board, that they could have something that they could look at, that they could also distribute to the people who want to work in our town. But more importantly, the people on that committee can look at it and point to it and say, you know, this is what we're expecting, this is what we want. And it gives it a little bit of teeth so that we can hopefully get some projects in town that are reflective of our character.
Laura.
Thank you all. Sounds like a great start. I have a couple of thoughts. I think the LCD, agree with what you said, Gary, about there could be different couple of models for it. If we can put in 100 and some units there, we're really talking about creating a new neighborhood in town, which I think is, you know, it shouldn't just be, let's push as much as we can there, or, you know, it's not just a math question, really. If this area does get developed, let's make it a neighborhood. Might have a different feel than the town center does, but how do we optimize that through the urban guidelines that you're talking about, the massing and the height and so forth. And I think that 3.5 stories is a human scale still. Depends again on the context around it, but certainly the LCD downtown could accommodate that, 3 stories plus a gable roof. And certainly the LCD, given the kind of, it's just wrapped in green space. It's a highly disturbed site, but it is kind of wrapped in green, could also accommodate some of the potentially higher buildings, tighter footprint. But I also want to see, I think that street front that you talked about is important, but one thing that our town does allow too is it's very green. So you've got these kind of a little bit of articulation in that street wall so that you've got room to plant a tree. We don't have much room for street trees in the right of way, but if you leave a little jagged edge in that street wall, you can get some greenery behind the street right away. So you think of the Stanley's garage site, and it's kind of this remnant piece of green, but it's really special to the downtown, right? It's got a few honey locust trees. It's got this kind of lovely pastoral feeling to it and anchors that town intersection. So there's a way to think about that in your urban design as well, because I think that also helps with scales. Trees help a lot with human scales. Obviously, we want to be thinking about climate change and stormwater management and cooling our public corridors. So I would just encourage you to think about ways that you can articulate the massing in the street wall to allow for some of that kind of green finger to come through.
Can I respond to that?
Please.
Yeah. I think about Cambridge's zoning, which really has very extensive a language about requiring a certain amount of usable green space globally, and then usable green space as a subgroup. And I think that we could probably put explicit mandatory rules in the zoning overlay district to require a certain amount of green space. There's certain things we could do in that direction. And then by having the buildings modulated so that we're encouraging the facades to not be these relentless walls.
Yeah.
That inherently will give you a setback area between the sidewalk and the building where you can do green space.
More questions? Yes, Sarah.
Mine's a process question. And that is, first of all, I think this is great. I really learned something and I'm excited about seeing your good guidelines. We have zoning and then the design guidelines. I think Emily said that they can be adopted by the planning board rather than being required in zoning. Is that true?
You can have some of each.
Some of each.
Yeah.
And then is it strategic for the planning board to adopt those before we adopt the zoning, or have we thought
I
about
don't think
that?
it matters. I think the state is gonna want to see them to make sure they're not discretionary, or
Okay.
overly discretionary.
And then the follow-up, the multifamily zoning overlays. The guidelines they won't be requirements unless they're in zone.
So
How does that work? We
So
know.
How it's gonna work is we're gonna require site plan review by the
Oh.
planning board for every one of these overlay districts.
Oh, okay.
Over a certain size, right?
Well, it's
Yeah, okay.
multifamily, so yeah. So then.
Have to meet every Monday.
And Thursday.
We don't think There's not gonna be that many.
Okay, okay. Site
And
plan
the
review.
second thing is that we're going to include the architectural design
Yeah.
guidelines as one of the performance
Standards,
standards.
yep,
in the
okay.
site plan review.
All right, I like that.
And I think the other thing to remember is that a homeowner, let's say in the general, district, we can do 3 units by right within an existing building. They don't want to go through a site plan review. They don't want to do the design
Right,
guidelines, that they go to the underlying zone.
Yeah,
Right.
everyone will always have the right to go to the underlying zone.
Right.
Yes, Erica.
I'm gonna go back to what I asked before. Erica Brown, Gale, 57 Brook Street. I'm wondering with the design guidelines, a lot of communities are adopting form-based zoning, which is a fundamentally mixed use.
Yeah.
And the strategy there is that downtown needs to be vibrant with mixed use and with something to go to. And it speaks to what you're talking about, this kind of, so I guess, because I think of things like, we used to have Zacks, we don't have Zacks anymore, and we can't have Zacks anymore. So we need to, we're depleting rather than, and this is an opportunity. I'm wondering if the logic for this multifamily residential mandate, I understand that it's a multifamily mandate. Is there an opportunity? Are you thinking that if we allow or encourage commercial downstairs with residential upstairs, then we're adding something and we don't want to because we want to add as little as possible? Because that's definitely the theme I'm feeling. But that definitely is the theme I'm feeling. That's the throughput here. But is it form-based or something that is more mixed use that invigorates downtown and the businesses that are downtown that really need help and support?
We couldn't agree more,
Okay.
the 3 of us. But I think the issue is what's allowed by, what they can allow.
Yeah,
right,
okay.
By the state requirement.
Sorry, okay.
I mean,
I thought I'd ask one more time.
I would add the most fertile of the incentives that we could use, the most reasonable or the most practical one to use downtown would be to allow greater height. So if you just give somebody, let them do a 4.5-story building, if it passes design review also, and if we get commercial mixed use on the first floor, those are the kind of things we should consider. for
Well, one of the things we
downtown
could
district.
say is that we could allow a special permit under the overlay district for a first floor commercial space and the same number of residential floors that would be allowed otherwise, which would do the same thing, but guarantee that.
But it still satisfies the state.
But still would satisfy the state.
So there are some things we could do.
John.
Sorry, John Harden, 54 School Street. There was something said before about being able to count the units, but not the land. What was that? Can someone explain that?
Sandy, you have to explain that.
Yeah. If in fact, the zoning mandated mixed use, as opposed to just allowing it. If it mandated, it would not be considered to be an MBTA zoning district. However, the units that the model would figure out could be counted, the residential units would count toward the 559 total, but the acreage would not.
And it doesn't go against the density calculation. So it's a no-win.
So the law is really, doesn't really foster misuse.
I understand,
It
but
kind
yeah.
of doesn't help.
Well, it does-
Like
I
to
say
help.
that, I say it doesn't help, but I'm not sure we shouldn't do it.
Right,
Oh, right.
absolutely.
I think we all would all agree we should do it.
But I'm
But
not
it
sure.
can be
we-
outside the MBTA zone.
I think that's well intentioned, but I don't imagine it happening. I'm sorry. But I think it may be worth the town to mandate mixed use. Maybe at the price of not counting the land, I understand, but there's an overall sense, I am also getting, I'm gonna be very honest, looking at those images and the land and whatnot that we've done, that you guys have worked on, we look like the town that doesn't want housing. And that might be true, but it looks like that to me, and the state might also think that.
Now they
Richard
won't
has
pay.
his hand up.
Richard.
Yes, Richard.
I was just going to point out that I think it was the consensus in our meetings that the downtown probably does need some serious rezoning, but we just can't do it with the MBTA zoning tools. So much of the issue of mixed use and required mixed use is a really good one for the town to be considering. And that's why we stayed away, as we did, from all but a very few units downtown. this is something that should be done, but if you do it under MBTA, you're going to be hitting with a hammer something that needs a much more delicate touch.
Jonathan Keith has his hand up.
Jonathan?
Yeah, hi, John Keith, 8 Victoria Road. I guess, Gary, you got some great thoughts, but I just want to caution us about going high in our downtown. We have very narrow streets, so you pointed out like the by the books location where next to the roast beef place in that building. So we could go a lot higher here. If that went higher, we'd have a dark corner on Union Street there. So I think Steve Coyle from the BRA was very artful at wedding caking, terracing buildings, so they didn't come right to the street with a 3-story wall. So I think I just want to caution us about raising heights in our downtown because we have narrow streets and it's going to take away a lot of sunlight and make it, to me, a little claustrophobic. Just is my opinion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
But we are talking about the design guidelines, we're talking about the districts you create, not any of the historic.
Yeah, that's right.
areas of
These
downtown.
design guidelines are only for the overlay districts.
Right, everything else falls into the normal zoning, which is the next opportunity to create.
Back here again next year.
Multi-use,
Yes,
I
sir.
just wanted to kind of circle back on this commercial first floor. And I think Richard said it well, is that this process has identified that as a need for us to take a hard look at it, but we need to get this MBTA zoning done first with a reconstituted, we'll bring all the task force people back for some more Thursday night meetings to help us get that done. Or something. So, there is important work to do that this has pointed out, and I think has helped us to realize that it's a need or an opportunity or both, so.
Yeah,
But I think the design guidelines help us to also think through what that looks like and how that we have an opportunity to frame it in a intentional way.
Yeah, and those changes in zoning would also be driven by the design guidelines, saying, oh, there's a hole in the street here, there's an opportunity, here's a corner that we could develop that could be mixed use.
Yeah.
With commercial and residential above. But there's a few of those opportunities around town that have to be rezoned to make them happen.
Richard may still have his hand up.
Richard, do you have another point?
Okay.
No, I'm just having a hard time lowering my hand.
No, nothing's changed.
He's on vacation, but still.
There's some question about the order of the overlay defining the overlay districts and the densities and putting forward design guidelines. And I think the town would be a lot more comfortable if the design guidelines, even if they weren't completely approved, were publicized
I agree.
so that people can imagine that the new developments would not look like.
Right, so they go hand in hand.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you not only go hand in hand, but the design guidelines maybe go a little bit first.
Well, we can put the draft post it on the website and people can look at it. That's a good
But they
idea.
need to go through the planning board and get a tacit approval,
Sure,
an intentional.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's distribute
process.
what we have, unless you guys are.
Could we get a little bit of budget here? I mean, so images will go a long way, and a lot of towns do have hired consultants to develop. A few images can really make the point.
We'll tell you what, we'll pool all of our salaries.
Donut money.
Well, it's an important enough thing, and there are funds in the town, and when is this supposed to be done? We don't even know.
Yesterday.
Yeah, well, we'd like to be able to submit all this to the state in June, early June.
Okay, so we should talk more after me.
I have a question. Have you guys looked at, so I know you can do in 4.5-story buildings, elevated buildings, you can do 105 units, which would be 15 per acre on that site. But have you looked at doing whether you can fit 105 units with other design concepts?
We've done 150 and 125 units there with two different approaches.
Okay.
And
Alright.
we have to work out the parking some more.
Mhm.
We wish we had, I'll say, but we wish we had that one more parcel, that other storage building there would let the place breathe a bit, and because
Parking is a big velocity.
Yes.
And so the more units you have, the more land you're
Mhm.
building on parking, so it's,
Mhm.
I think we'll come up with 3 or 4 options. At least give you an idea. I have 2 more on my sleeve.
Well, hopefully in the next meeting or two, we'll be able to kind of hammer out some of the densities
Mhm.
so that you'll have a much narrower window. It won't be a 50-unit window. It'll be, let's say, 10. Hopefully.
Yes, Laura.
Could we go back to the map? If you wouldn't mind sharing that? And while you're doing that, so if the design guidelines team is studying the LCD and they're saying we need a little more breathing room to model the ideal neighborhood, it would be nice to look at what that parcel is and have them study it from that point, not just trying to solve for the mass, but trying to solve for the neighborhood. I'd love to see that.
Then we have to decide whether we have to increase the size of the contiguous area downtown. That's.
So that's my other question about the downtown is, can we go back to
Yeah.
the way out map, not the LCD? So we're talking about the downtown, like we're trying to limit anything, we're trying to put the housing in the LCD because we have to, but in the downtown, we want to keep it small, granular. I get that, but it does feel like we're not gonna actually achieve housing down there except for maybe onesies, twosies. Did we, in thinking about the Stanley's parcel and whether in a different world, you might want to zone that for mixed use and require commercial because it is right in the center. Did you look at the parcels around the Cape Ann Savings Bank? Could the design team look at some of the 2-acre parcel?
So we
And
looked at
say,
all
what
this.
does a low density neighborhood scale development look like on that? So we would have some choice about not trying to squeeze it all right into the downtown and actually build housing.
Leanne answered that question.
If we have lower density in the LCD, we have to have higher density in the downtown.
Right, so could you look at a different parcel that you haven't looked at yet?
Where, downtown?
Not, well, within the half-mile radius. So you're saying you're staying away from the 2-acre parcels. I don't have a parcel in mind. I'm just saying, is there another way that you can
But
look at this
The
to solve
problem
for
is,
that?
to get the total acreage.
Yeah.
You need that almost 7 acres additional,
In the LCD?
total.
Somewhere.
Yeah, somewhere.
So, and then you also need half of it to be contiguous.
Right.
So it's a very careful
It's the
juggling of
contiguous piece, yeah.
numbers, that if you start increasing the size in the LCD, now you may have to increase the size downtown of that
You need another
contiguous
acre and a half
area.
Right.
Downtown.
And the more acreage you have, then the more total units you need.
So like the Cape Ann Savings Bank where there's a gap and the missing tooth and all that, you can't use that parcel
It-
because that's not contiguous.
It
is
butts
that
up
the-
against municipal land. Which
And
is
that's-
excluded.
Right.
Okay, that came in.
So it's not-
And or historic,
It
so
doesn't give you size.
Right,
for the
originally, we
minimum
looked at
lot
Harbor's Point and that Cape Ann Savings.
Right.
And we looked at bringing it back behind Town Hall.
Right, because that seems like
And
an
it
opportunity
just
to
didn't
actually
work.
mend the street fabric. Yeah,
Didn't
it
work.
doesn't work.
and so then you have the historic, is the green.
I see
Right.
that, yeah, I was trying to
That's-
stay away from that, but
So that's another
looking
challenge.
south of that.
And then behind it is
Yeah,
it floods, so.
I'm sorry, your points are really great, and I think that we have to slide them into the next zoning look, of what can we do to make downtown more
Yeah,
easily to develop.
yeah,
Yeah, the trouble is we're given a hammer.
I get it,
and
so
Used to try to,
I think the task force is doing a great job of solving for the math. And I'm understanding better what some of, like, why the Cape Ann Savings Bank doesn't work, because it's not contiguous, but now maybe let the math sit for a minute, so I'll turn it over to the design guidelines team and let them actually study the, how to build a neighborhood in these different parcels and, see what the density ought to be and see how to, encourage commercial where we want commercial
it's
and
just it's tough to do that. In
I
6
get it.
months.
It's really important. It's really important. Double their salary.
If you give us a number, it would, I mean, to do studies in the LCD, we really, if you could give us a number of what you
Yeah,
need,
well, I
that
think,
would help
yeah,
tremendously.
I think hopefully we'll be able to start narrowing that down by our, during our next meeting. So,
Could I just give a hug for for urban design? There are a lot of, on a phase 2 effort by the town, there are some ills in downtown we could cure. There are mechanisms to do it, tax grants, matching grants. There's things that towns have been able to do to sort of fill in those voids of the downtown and make the streetscapes much more pleasant and more enclosed. Or whatever our goal is, there's stuff we could do once this is all finished.
Okay, any more questions from anybody?
Sarah Pierce still has her hand.
Oh, Sarah,
Hi, yes, thank you so much. I just want to say honestly, being a lifelong resident of Manchester by the Sea, it is super disheartening to hear that we would even consider putting 4.5-story buildings in the downtown. So I want to just confirm, is that something that Gary Gilbert is honestly considering?
This is a group effort for sure. There was 5 or 6 of us to begin with. We're down to about 3 or 4. But we've been talking about 3.5 story as a base height. And only higher if the town's gonna get something they really want. This, our little list of things we wanna see. The only way to get those is to encourage the market, use the market forces to give you the 20% affordable housing or the workers' housing or whatever, or mixed use. You've got to offer something to somebody if you want to get that.
Well, I just think it would be a very big mistake to put 4.5-story buildings in the downtown of Manchester. In addition, we keep referring to our town as urban. Our town is not urban. It's just not. So we're.
I don't think the task force is assuming 4.5 stories downtown.
Okay, well, that's kind of reassuring because we've been going with this theory that we're not building Rantoul Street, but 4.5-story buildings, that is Rantoul Street.
no, Rantoul Street's 6 and 7 stories.
Well, in some, yeah, but I would love to see if Gary, if you have a design you could do of like even 3.5 stories, do a model of that. It's going to create, I agree with a lot of shadowing, possibly, it's a whole different concept. You're changing the whole town.
Right, I don't want to get into a back and forth here. I think you made your point, sir, and we'll take it into consideration.
Thanks so much, Chris.
Yeah.
Richard, do you have one more thing you want to say?
I just want to point out, maybe to add on to that, that the height is going to be a zoning issue. It's not a design review issue. It's going to be part of the zoning rules. Am I not right about that?
Okay, thank you for that. Are we done here?
Move we adjourn.
We've got minutes.
God.
Wishful thinking.
What other agenda items?
Actually,
Approved minutes.
Gail
did her
to
minutes.
approve.
I know.
Gail, what minutes did the task force have? I think the planning board does not have minutes, so I think the planning board can take a motion to adjourn. All in favor? Goodbye. There is a meeting next Thursday. Okay. On the 18th. And that will have a 6 p.m. planning board meeting to review the articles for town meeting that have the procurement of land.
That doesn't give us the 7 days that we need to provide for the town before town meeting.
Greg, is that going to be sufficient?
I'm sorry?
The question is, if we act on the articles on the warrant on Thursday, is that going to be sufficient time?
I would encourage you to go ahead and do that. And if
Yeah.
there's not an objection, it'll be fine.
I'm just saying our bylaw says it has to be 7 days, so.
I'm fully aware of that, and you were scheduled to do that last week, and because of the untimely death of a board member, we have some unusual circumstances. So given those unusual circumstances, I am pretty confident that the electorate would be okay with that.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I understand, but we were supposed to do it tonight as well, so we always creep time and it's not good.
Thank you.
Sarah, are you saying 6 o'clock for the planning
6
board? and
o'clock with the
6:30
planning
for the
board.
group?
Yeah, we may try
Yes.
to get to rooms after the session. Okay,
Is that okay with everybody?
all right. And you have
Okay.
further business, we can sneak out.
Okay. So, do we have a motion to approve the minutes for the task force?
So moved.
Second.
In favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
One abstention.
I'll abstain.
Well, Michael and Harry abstain. Okay,
Done.
all right, Gar, you're on.
I move we adjourn.
You have a Second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Aye.
Thank you, everybody.
Oh, Gar, can I get a ride home?
Anybody else who wants to ride a big?
Is it raining?
It was raining lightly. I got.